Hey, so welcome everyone. My name's Holly. I'm the MD of BEMA. And yeah, a massive welcome to BEMA's second and audience with. And we're really chuffed to have Martha Lane Fox join us today. So before we get kick-started, I just wanted to give everyone some of the basics around BEMA, because I know we've got lots of members on this session, but lots of non-members too. So BEMA is UK's biggest digital community. Everything we do is around representing and developing digital talent, wherever it may be. So that's across lots of agencies, tech companies, startups, in-house teams in brands, and increasingly, universities. So it's a really broad church, which makes it even more interesting. And everything we do is around driving innovation. So whether that is, speaking to 13 to 17-year-olds throughout the UK about the opportunities within digital, to providing learning and development opportunities for those practicing, for those in the industry, to driving thought leadership around, AI, data, creative, and much, much more. So if you would like to find out more, please go to bema.co.uk or give me a shout. I'm on hollyhall@bema.co.uk. We would love to have you involved. I also just wanted to give you a heads up on some of the other events we've got going on. We've got a lot going on. So next Wednesday, we have our weekly BEMA senior leaders roundtable. So basically, if you're a member, you can come and share your problems, hopefully solve some of those problems as well. We also have, I have to read this now, we have a BEMA Hangout on the 7th. So how is COVID-19 affecting our next generation? We have on the 12th, another Hangout, how to lead a sustainable recovery. And then on the 14th, we have our next an audience with, which is with the amazing AI and tech philosopher, Nell Watson. So let's move on to this session. I think, one of the things Martha said was, let's make this as interactive as possible. So we have chat enabled, we have the Q&A enabled, and please do, start interacting with each other, start asking questions, and we hope to get lots of those answered. But before we move on to those questions, I wanted to introduce our host, who's going to ask some of his own. That's Tarek Nasir. Tarek is Head of Digital Engagement at EPAM, but much more importantly, he is co-president of BEMA. Tarek.
Thank you, Holly. So as Holly said, we'd like to keep this interactive. So please drop your questions into the questions box as we go, and I'll make sure I keep an eye on them and pick up from there. So it's with great pleasure I can introduce you all to Baroness Lane Fox. I could spend probably 25 minutes telling you
Please, let's not. Really, let's not do that.
You mean to? But I mean, look, here are just some basic highlights. So started lastminute.com with Brent Hoberman, then actually had a killer role at Selfridges and a horrible car accident that then led her to starting Lucky Voice, which is somewhere that I've been sort of miserably drunk at countless times, not miserably actually, but very drunk at, too many times that I can recount. And then she's had this incredible state where she's helped us in government. So she was our digital champion. She basically made sure that everybody had internet connectivity in the best way we could, and imagine where we'd be now if she hadn't had done that. She's obviously a member of the House of Lords. She's on countless boards, and I've heard Martha speak on numerous occasions, and you're all in for a real treat. So welcome, Martha, and thank you very much for doing this. So we are obviously in this crazy period, and many of the people who have joined us are facing very difficult times from a business perspective. It's a bit of a crisis. And we were just wondering if you could maybe share some experience, past or present, of what you've seen happening and what's come out of crisis, and sort of give us some inspiration about our way through.
Thank you, and great to be here. Do you know, one of the phrases that I think has been most overused, apart from unprecedented in the last kind of month, is this phrase which I think people ascribe to William Churchill, I'm not sure, which is never let a good crisis go to waste. And I was thinking about this because I remember writing a blog when Brexit was in the throes of Brexit, and I wrote something about, you know, let's use this as a chance to reinvent the UK and put digital at the heart and all this stuff. And I thought, I'm frightfully clever. What a brilliant way of just analysing where we are right now. And I've heard this phrase again and again, and everyone's saying, oh, out of crisis comes opportunity, you know, amazing things. I think sometimes it's just really important to recognise that this is a bit shit for people, and more than a bit shit, hard, difficult, scary. You can feel fearful. It's anxious making. If you're the entrepreneur, it's horrible. If you're someone that's been furloughed, it's horrible. If you're somebody that doesn't know if you're going to have a job next week, it's horrible. So I think first thing I'd say is all love and support to you, because this is a bit horrible, and I will try and do my best to give you some of my strange experiences, and if you can find something helpful in them, I'm delighted. But I also really want to recognize that this is really tricky and challenging, and I've certainly never lived through anything like it. If I think about the moments where, you know, either quite parochially my working life was in crisis, so the dot-com crash of the early 2000s, sorry, when our company lastminute.com had just gone public. We were lucky, we got it away, we managed to raise all this money. Our share price had been £5.35, and then it was slowly going down and down and down and down and down, and all of a sudden it was 20p. And so we were looking at a company that was basically worth a fraction of what people had invested in. No one in the company was going to make the money they thought they were going to make. We were in a kind of cycle of doom. That, you know, even that feels, you know, relatively easy compared to things that people are facing now. So I think that recognizing that this is super hard and being kind to yourself and allowing yourself a bit of just, you know, space, emotional headspace, all that stuff is super important. But the second thing I'd say is that it's also, I think, incredibly kind of empowering to think about all those things that perhaps you hadn't dared to think about doing before. So if you're the entrepreneur, of course, you're going to have a bunch of plans that you didn't quite get to, or maybe some people that you think, actually, I'm not sure I really think they should be in the company anymore, or maybe some partners that you think, I don't really want to work with them, or maybe some different product that you want to launch. And this is the time when it is the right moment to be thinking about those things. And even more than that, to sort of imagine the world beyond this, because we will get there. It will be different, but we will get there. And I think to sort of start to map out what that looks like, because if you're kind of taking those local smaller actions now about things perhaps that you've been a bit unsure about doing, but this has forced you into doing, combined with having a really sort of good vision for 3, 4, 5 years time, whatever feels right to you, I think operating at those two levels can be really helpful. Sorry, a long answer, but I really, I feel for anybody running a small business, in a business that's in a tricky situation, because it's not easy. It's really not easy. Tarek, you've gone. I can't hear you. You're on mute.
I'm on mute. Thank you. You must be really proud. I hope you are really proud of the efforts, you know, that you put in to make sure that more people in the UK are connected, because obviously now it's, you must be.
You know what? Oh, you've made me squirm. You've made me squirm genuinely, because I've not been sleeping very well. I think, like lots of people, kind of waking up at 5 a.m. thinking, okay, I might as well just get up now. And one of the things that slightly haunts me, and I don't mean to make it all about me at all, is just that actually we didn't get far enough. You know, I know I managed to start the conversation, and I know that we got some quite significant amounts of government money into directly helping people get online. But the argument that I was trying to make to government was particularly around helping the most vulnerable people. And although it seems kind of counterintuitive to put the government money where people are most offline, actually it makes total sense for everybody, because those are the people who have most to gain. We as citizens gain because we're more digitized as a society. I mean, it's obvious to people in the digital sector, but in 2009 and 10, people would still look at me going, really? Do you think that's the best use of government money? Yeah. And so I did work as hard as I could at it, but now I look back and it wasn't enough. It just wasn't enough. And there are still too many people. And if I think about, somebody who's living with kids who don't necessarily have access to a computer, who are being asked to do all this stuff online, and maybe don't even have anywhere to go outside, and all those things coming together. To me, that is an urgent crisis, and very easy to forget about because it's not really seen.
Well, that really says something about you, Martha. And I guess the question I wanted to ask was about how you think we're going to come out of this in terms of our society's relationship with the internet. And obviously it's really interesting how the pendulum has swung so many times now. And I think I'm trying to think about what our relationship is going to be like with technology coming through the crisis.
Yeah.
And it must be something that you've been thinking about. What are your thoughts?
Yep. Like everyone in our sector and beyond, I think it's just been fascinating, hasn't it? So just a bit of personal experience. So I was asked in 2015 to give the Dimbleby Lecture, which is a big lecture on TV, BBC One. BBC gets free television, and some poor muppet like me has to sweat and toil over producing 45 minutes of TV. And I talked at that point, 2015, so 5 years ago, about how it felt to me that the shine was coming off tech. Not because I'm clever, because it was blooming obvious, right? Silicon Valley companies, people were worried about just their routes into the UK, everything being bought up by the West Coast, through to what's happening to our data, through to the appalling gender balance and diversity in our sector. So that's what I talked about a lot. And then the following 2, 3, 4 years happened where the techlash fully whipped us all, and from everything from hacking scandals to things that we all are well acquainted with around Cambridge Analytica and so on. So it moves so fast. I mean, I was surprised in the shift of that pendulum, I think. And, I've spoken quite a lot about how it, I'm not a kind of techno utopian. I don't think everything gets better because it's on the internet, quite the opposite. Yeah. But I 100% hate it when we use the internet as a scapegoat for everything. And I think it's always much more nuanced and complicated than perhaps particularly big media headlines or politicians talk about. And it felt as though for a while, you really wouldn't lose a vote as a politician if you bashed the internet. Terrorist attack, blame the internet. Young people depressed, blame the internet. And so everything was always kind of lashed back into the sector. And I don't know if you feel the same, or I'd love to hear what people listening feel. It's now, I think people are a bit like, oh, that's a bit confusing, because we thought we really didn't like the internet and we thought it wasn't doing any good. And now, oh my God, I couldn't survive if I couldn't have things delivered, if I couldn't get online to talk to my friends, if I wasn't re-downloading House Party from the late 90s or whatever it was. Exactly. So I think it's really interesting to see how what then moves forward or backwards or sideways because of it. I think that in some ways, obviously it's given this kind of exponential thrust to the necessity for everything to digitize. I don't think this is going to be the last time this happens in our lifetimes. I think we're going to have to get more used to, for whatever reason, whether it's pandemics or climate crisis based stuff. Unfortunately, I think we're going to have to get more used to doing more stuff digitally, working more from home, different ways of working, so on and so on. So I think that has 100% given the spur to definitely the commercial sector to become more digital.
Totally.
But what it means for people in their average day, I don't mean average, no one has an average life, sorry. I mean, in their daily lives, I don't know. I think it's confusing. And I am mindful of the work that Doteveryone has done around looking at people's attitudes to tech. And the last time we did our survey, it was 2 years ago, and only 12% of people thought the internet was good for society. And I don't know what that will be now. We're just about to redo the work, so it will be very interesting to find out. I think that, sorry, I will again be quiet in a minute. I think just a couple of things, though. I do think that it has shown people that we are able to operate in a different way. Oh. And some of that is good and some of that is bad. But, the enormous creativity that has emerged because of this, the organizing that is able to happen because of technology. And I sit on the board of Twitter, and I know that there's lots of things about Twitter that still need to be enormously improved. But one of the things that I'm proud of to be associated with Twitter is the amount of people that I've met who said, I wouldn't be able to have run my campaign, started this charity, got this thing done if I hadn't been able to use that platform. In fact, I met the man that runs, what was it? He runs 111, like all the 999 services for the country. And he told me that without Twitter, there would no question in his mind be 3 or 4 women more more women dead because of domestic abuse, because they use Twitter to secretly find the police when it looks like they're doing something different on their phone. No one thinks that they're going on to Twitter to talk to the police. So, you know, all those things. And I think that what we've seen with this crisis is just, we've reminded ourselves of the power of some of those things. And maybe we'll put down our phones a bit more as a result of this crisis, but maybe we'll pick them up with a bit more intention as well.
So I think there's a couple of questions that have been asked sort of that kind of maybe build on this a little bit. And that's really thinking about the world of work and how this remote working has transformed the world of work, and particularly how it's opened up a realization that for those who sort of full-time roles or roles at all would have seemed sort of inaccessible, now everything seems so much more accessible, whether you're disabled or somebody who needs extremely flexible hours. And that's, you know, it's really exciting. And Craig Cockburn sort of brings this up and asks, how can we make sure this you know, continues? And I'm, you know, just wondering what your thoughts were in that regard.
I think that, I mean, I really do think it depends by sector and by what your working life is. But I think that, as you say, it has shown every company that much more is possible than I think they thought in the past, and that you can be much more productive. Again, to use Twitter as an example, Twitter was building to a kind of much more distributed workforce over the next 5 years. And Jack Dorsey, the boss, took the call to make everyone work from home before it was even, we weren't thinking about it in Europe. So he really did kind of try and hardwire in the company. And it's been interesting to see how actually, you know, of course it's hard. Of course it's hard if you've got children at home, but actually a lot of the engineering teams are on fire, releasing way more product than they ever had before. So I think just by example, you have got a firmer ground. And I think now when people have the conversation with their bosses, and that's what I would urge people to do, to say, look, I want this flexibility. That was the direction of travel anyway in the world of work. And I think compared to when I started working, people often have 2 or 3 jobs. They might be doing something entrepreneurial alongside their job. They might work a 4-day week, whatever it is. I think you do now have the license to have that conversation in a different way, and to offer it with much more certainty. If you're the entrepreneur, to offer it with more certainty that you can get a lot of stuff done. If you're the employee, to talk about it with a lot more certainty that you like it and can do it and can be effective.
Indeed. Great. That's really good to hear. And I think the other question I wanted to ask was, this seems to have all come at a time when our social consciousness is now sort of more kind of acute than it has been in quite some time. And, you know, it's a similar question, I guess. So we've talked about, you know, the workplace and work culture and what the ways we're working together remotely. What about our social consciousness, and how do you think we're going to respond when the airplanes when the sky fill with airplanes again? Will we just continue as normal?
I really hope not. You know, one of the things that I've really tried to do in the last year, with kind of marginal success, but I'm determined to continue, is to try and move everything I'm thinking about or doing much more into thinking about the climate crisis. And, you know, the links between this crisis and the climate are beginning to be well documented. Destruction of biodiversity has led to more likelihood of pandemics and diseases being transmitted in different ways and so on. So there's the kind of very straight line, but then there's all these other tangential lines. I mean, the air pollution is just staggering. Every time I read about, you know, suddenly from the Punjab, they can see the Himalaya and they haven't managed to see it for 30 years, or that the traffic levels are now, meaning that we have 1950s levels of pollution in London. Amazing, I just have as many headaches. I'm not sure about everyone here, but it's astonishing. So really, I don't think people will accept in the same way. I don't know what that looks like quite, but I think it means that there will be more of an activism around the good things that have come from this, or taking a moment to just reflect on the way you are using your own, making your own life choices, I guess. But, you know, I'm also not completely naive. In the end, a lot of this stuff does come down to legislation, and, you know, politicians are often clearly at the vagaries of what they think their constituents want, but also the kind of wider media reception. And if this, again, has sort of led people to think a bit differently about what people can deal with and want, then maybe they will have more grist to their mill to make the difficult legislative decisions. I mean, as you said before, sorry, as a specific example, right? The net zero emissions target in the UK, the carbon neutral target, net zero target that we have by 2050 or 2040, sorry. In that, if someone had said no cars in London, everyone would have been like, no way, you're freaking joking, no way. Now you've sort of seen it and you can sort of believe that, okay, it might not be easy, but we can imagine it in a way that I think often some of this climate conversation was just too impossible. So yeah, hopefully, fingers crossed. Fingers crossed emoji, fingers crossed emoji, fingers crossed emoji.
Indeed. And I guess obviously at some stage we had to start talking about technology for good and Doteveryone, and many of the people who have joined us build digital products and services all the time. And so they are all using and delivering technology for various outcomes. And I wonder if you could give us a sort of your perspective on what we as industry practitioners could and should be doing to and can do insofar as the fact, we all run commercial businesses. But how do you think we can play our part in your mission?
Well, my mission is very commercial. I'm not sitting here saying everyone has to be building products for not-for-profits. That's one thing.
Sure.
But what I'm saying is something a bit different, which is that every single business needs to make sure it is deploying technology responsibly. And that will make you more commercially successful, because that's about making sure that people understand where their data is. It's about making sure that you are seeing around the corners of the products that perhaps you might not have seen around before by building diverse teams and all those things. Look at Zoom, right? I mean, a classic example right now, very relevant. Even just 6 weeks ago, 2 months ago, masses of porn bursting into Zoom. I've read so many hilarious, not hilarious, kind of funny examples of people being at big conferences using Zoom online, and then boom, suddenly something appalling going on in the screen being hacked. Zoom hadn't even considered this would be a scenario where Zoom would be being used every day by so many millions of people. And so they had been slightly fly about their security, as many people have now been talking about. Most recently, Alex Stamos, ex-Facebook, now Zoom, he was the security guy from Facebook and now jumped to help Zoom. So they just didn't look round the corners. They didn't imagine that you might need to let people into a conference call. They thought a video call, you might just all be able to hop on it. They didn't, and I give that as a very real example of a direct link between not thinking through the unintended consequences of what you're building, and then suddenly it's scaling and then that happening. So what I'm interested in is encouraging not just the technology sector, but every business, because every business is digital now, to think about how it builds its products and services in the most responsible, fair, inclusive, and long-term and diverse way, because I think that's what makes products and services successful, and that's what means that your business is more likely to be successful, because you won't suddenly find yourself then facing some terrible hole or aspect of your product that you hadn't imagined.
And do you think that, sorry to keep bringing it back to the crisis, but do you think that the crisis also creates that something to reflect on in that mission too? Because in many ways the exclusion of people is now very, very clear where they are excluded. It's hugely problematic. In fact, there's a few questions already about, for example, with an anonymous attendee who's a single mum. She has been asked to do her computing degree remotely. She hasn't got broadband. It's going to take till June to get it installed, and the university is doing nothing about it.
I would like to know which university it is, and I would like to be able to help you. I'm sorry, that sounds like a version of hell. I really hope that somebody can help help you sort it out. I was reminding myself the other day of the first kind of hell days of lastminute.com, when our biggest challenge was watching the screen just go duk, 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 and that feels so far away now, unless you're living in it still. So I'm sorry you are. I think that I forgot the question. What was the question? I was worrying about the lady without her broadband.
Okay, so I was simply stating that I think maybe this moment also
is a moment of to build responsibly. I hope so. I think that's right. I am, responsibility is sounds like a too portentous a word, but it shouldn't. It just means you're aware of your relationship to society and the change you're creating in the world. And that is as true for a incredibly worthy not-for-profit as it is for a big commercial beast. And I just think there should be no excuses for always thinking about the effect that you're having on a wider society. So if this is a moment to be able to do that more, fantastic. And Doteveryone has built these tools called the Tech Transformed tools that help navigate through just a series of questions and ideas and ways of workshopping what that means for you and your organization. So trying to kind of pull this slightly existential word, ethics and morals, that everyone is talking about, into something that feels real, that makes tangible steps to be able to change what you're building.
So I'm going to ask Gareth Dunlop's question now, and he says, we understand that sometimes technology can have unanticipated negative consequences, but often it can have entirely predictable negative consequences. Does not everyone
Good point.
take the position that it is wrong to use technology for those purposes, such as gambling?
It's a good question. I think that I don't inherently think there's something wrong with gambling. I think that the ways in which certain gambling sites have been constructed are wrong, and I would absolutely take that. Martha personally would take that view, and I think that everyone would as well. We're not completely linked, I've got to be careful in speaking for a whole organization, but I would say that I don't have a kind of moral issue with a lot of ways of building entertainment products online, and gambling can be one, but do I think it should have the kind of irresponsible levels of credit flashing up in front of you? No. Do I think it should be on such an endless time you can just go on and on? No. It feels like there's a whole bunch of very simple mechanisms to make it less predictably awful. So that's what I would say. But I'm not sort of sitting here becoming like some kind of Victorian with my button-up corset saying no, nothing should be fun or enjoyable on the internet. I think that you can have both parts of the coin.
Great. And there's another question actually, and I wanted to ask that one. So question says, are the challenges that we're facing now, and possibly with the climate challenges that we may see over the forthcoming period, do you think government and business are equipped to face into those challenges?
Easy question. Who are you? What's your name? How can I pin this question to you?
It's from Dave Elliman, but
hello Dave, thank you for that extremely easy question. Do I think government and business? I mean, some are, it's such an enormous question. I think that a few things immediately occur to me. Firstly, I don't think that government and business actually work enough together. And I certainly don't think that government and startups work, not startups, but kind of newish, smaller innovative companies work enough together. Yeah. And I think that is something that could unlock huge potential in helping to solve some of these problems. So, it is very hard, the procurement process in government. And we did a bit of work in that when we set up the government digital service, but not enough. And I mean, I didn't do enough. I mean, the team did a lot, but it was only the starting of the work. And there's still, it's difficult. I don't know if anybody is familiar here with Dan Korski and the work that his team at Public have been doing, trying to build GovTech in quotation mark startups. So particularly focused on helping deliver public services in a better way. And yet it's hard for them to scale into government. And Dan is a guy that used to work in number 10 and can work his way around government easy peasy. So I think that is a big unlock for me, not just the business tangentially and government in these huge, big amorphous things, but specifically helping government work with more innovative and smaller companies. And I think that's a big piece. So no, I don't think that's working. I think that I'm sure many of you here are familiar with the notion of a B Corp that measure a different set of things, an idea that's come from the US. I think that we need more resonance about B Corps here in the UK and build them out, because they do have a different set of values and you have to be measured against a different set of values. And I think that those kinds of mechanisms are helpful. And, shareholder value comes in many forms. I don't believe purpose and profit are separate. I believe they work together. And I think you can't have one without the other at a meaningful level, certainly not in the future. So I think there are ways that we can unlock more of that in the commercial sector. So there's so many aspects to your question. I feel like I could talk about it for 15 minutes, but I think more startups and innovation able to plug into government and help build scale through innovation in government. Secondly, definitely more interesting ways of thinking about what shareholder value in quotation mark means.
Yeah.
And then I think the final piece I'd say, which I'm sorry if this is repetitive to stuff I've said before, but I think that one of the most urgent challenges is joining up the world that we are all relatively familiar with on this call, with the world of policy making and governments in all its forms, whether that's the parliaments of governments or the delivery of public services. Your experience of Facebook's user interface and Amazon's delivery and what and other sites' ability to just nail it in terms of what you want when you need it, and the reality of how both government works, how we as citizens interact with government, not obviously the work we did in GDS, but other bits, and the policymakers' understanding is still way too far apart. Totally. And we need to raise the bar in understanding for all the people in government, all the people in public policy roles, all the heads of schools, all the heads of clinical commissioning groups. We should be making sure that all these people are able to understand the options that we have in 2020, because these are the people playing with our money in budgets and making big important decisions. So that to me is we are in no way equipped yet to say we have done that.
No, there's a big journey ahead. And in terms of the way that government, whether you call it crowdsourcing or something else, but the way that it effectively garners a response and garners contributions, from the commercial sector at scale, that in this period it felt somewhat clumsy, didn't it? In particular, and it feels like this is not going to be the only crisis we have to respond to. What's your view on what government can do to significantly just step change the way it can garner a response from business? And
I mean,
big question, I know.
No, but it's hard to answer because I'm still unclear, and I'm not making a big political point here, maybe just a small one, about how much this is just this shade of government versus that governments. I don't know how much of the things that I would say had not been handled well in this crisis were just mistakes because of a shade of politics, or whether they're just much more complex things. Okay. And I think that it's really, really important to think about how we can make sure that communications from government and communications to government flow much more easily than they seem to have done. I think that, I don't know about you, but I still feel as though the advice that came from government was very confusing for the first period of time, just as the advice that they were asking for from us was very confusing. What were they asking for from business? And then what are we being told to do? And that relationship wasn't working. So I think that's where I might start, is just making sure that the comms and the tools of the modern age again are being deployed to be most effective.
Okay, good. All right, I've got one more question. I'm going to attempt to name. It's Jonas Ralph Mortensen. I've already been told off for mispronouncing a name, so I will do my best to get it better. He's asking, do you think that we will see disruptive shifts in companies doing well during this crisis, moving into sectors that had been hit hard by the crisis, and if so, which sectors? I mean, we are kind of seeing some of this already, I think. But.
Yeah, I mean, name a sector that isn't going to be hit hard is, it's really tough. Clearly, you want to be in a hygiene-based business right now. I mean, Reckitt Benckiser, Unilever, all these businesses are looking pretty sparkly, aren't they? I mean, if I was the brand manager for Dettol, I'd be feeling pretty happy. So, I mean, no one's happy. That was glib. Sorry, I didn't mean that. I meant there are some products that we're going to become more and more reliant on. And so I would say that it's not hard to map out a few sectors that are going to benefit. Unfortunately, I think more than that, what's going to happen is that big just gets bigger. Yeah. And it is harder to be a small company right now, and it is harder to be a startup right now. And I think that you have these enormous, often unregulated monopolies, particularly in tech, clearly, that are going to have more resources to be able to buy up these small bits of talent and suck them into the machine. So that's, I find, upsetting, because you spend a lot of time building ecosystem. I'm not just talking about the UK, but globally, and you're just going to see the same companies kind of sucking them up. But there are going to be some sectors that will win. They're very easy and predictable to write in some ways, and incredibly difficult to write and be unpredictable in others. Technology ones, perhaps, clearly. Hygiene-based businesses. I want to be starting a mask business right now, I think. And you know, I'm interested in people's views as well about what the winners are going to be over time. It feels like you know, nobody's really winning right now.
No, I mean a number of our clients, you can see those who essentially are already have a true digital culture and DNA in their operations and in everything they're executing, have that agility to execute, and those who have more legacy states are clearly.
No, sorry, you're right. From a kind of non-sectoral point of view, sorry,
Yeah.
absolutely. I went down a kind of, okay, what products are going to sell? But you're absolutely right. I am clearly not, I mean, yes, enabled by digital, of course, but I think it's something else, because, you know, digital it's not a set of wires and a bit of infrastructure. It's a mindset to me, and it's a ability to iterate regularly, to make incremental product shifts, and I'm going to use the word agile. I'm just going to say I'm not going to use it, but to me, it's being able to course correct again in quite small little doses and move on. And I think that's what I've learned from the digital world, is to kind of cope with ambiguity by just making a constant set of decisions, many of which might be wrong, but just keep moving through them. Some ways that's quite entrepreneurial, some ways that's quite digital. They kind of come together, and then I think you've got a really good combination.
Indeed. So another question from the audience, an anonymous one. So on tech education, what is your guidance to small businesses to better understand what they can do with digital technology, short of learning to code?
I can't code. I'm a classical historian. I can't code. No, I don't know why that should be either or. Look at Catherine Parsons. She could do both. Yeah, I'm not sure coding is the thing. I think robots are going to be doing the coding. To me, it is about embracing the mindset, not being frightened of asking questions. You know, I really don't mean this in a disingenuous or overly self-effacing way, but if I've learned something from my 25 or whatever years in the technology sector, quite surprising that I've even ended up in the sector, it's just to keep asking questions and not be frightened to, even if it feels like the subjects are intractable and impossible and you'll never get to an answer and you'll never understand what's going on. Because very often no one does, because these are calls about the future that nobody's really certain of. And even in tech stuff, I mean, you just keep asking the questions. So don't be scared to ask questions. If the next wave of digitization to you looks terrifying in your business, then break it down into little steps. Find some people who can lead you through it. Talk to some younger people, you know, to get some nous, and just keep being curious about it, because there is no right or wrong, even if it might feel like that's the case sometimes. And I think that just making those first few steps into you know, embracing something in a different way can be often the first step to embracing digital.
So a question for me, I think I'm intrigued because I heard you speak once, and I heard your story of your accident and the way you pulled through from it. And the reason why I'm sort of referring to that is because I think that there are a lot of people who are going through some real personal challenges now, and if they were before, then they certainly are now. And we've seen that certainly be the case of many of our membership. The mental health of our industry was not exactly in a great shape before the crisis, to be perfectly honest. So what can you share from your journey?
Well, no, and that's why I really did start when you asked me my first question by saying, you know, please, this is hard, and recognizing that it's really freaking hard is, I think, an important thing. You know, I'm kind of bored with people a bit like me just saying, oh, you know, use this opportunity for change, you know, fire half your force, reinvent your product, you know, all this stuff. It's like, well, actually, I'm sitting in my bedroom, I'm feeling it. I don't necessarily have a job. My children are screaming out there. I don't know what's going to happen at the end of the year. It's really quite scary, right? And as I say, although clearly no one's ever lived through this before, because it is unprecedented, I have had a very unusual experience in my life. You know, in 2004, I broke 28 bones in a car crash, and I spent the next 2 years in hospital. In and out, but basically in hospital for 2 years. And someone a good friend of mine very astutely said to me the other day, she said, this is why you're very well practiced at this, because you're used to being constrained in a way that many of us aren't. And I thought, yes, sort of I am. Perhaps that's a good analogy, I don't know. But if I have a few things to share, I think they would be these. I think the first thing is that, you know, I did mean that when I said think about the very small and the slightly longer term, because I personally have often found that quite reassuring. So the things you can do something about today, And that might not be anything to do with your business. I'm sure your businesses are all fantastic and your jobs are all important, but it might just be something to make you feel better today. Going outside for a walk, going for a run, reading a book, reading a poem, whatever it might be. Combining that with then the longer term thing of trying to think about imagining what it is going to be like when things are better and you've got a bit more breathing space, because it will happen. Even if the world is different and even if things might not be as you hope, it will change from now. This is not going to be forever. And if, you know, if I can share a slightly strange example of that, you know, I think one of the toughest things I had to do in hospital was the first time I had to stand up and then take a tiny step. And you don't do that in one go, right? You edge up over probably about a month, because I've been lying down for nearly 9 months. And you edge up, and you're in this kind of torture contraption that makes you look like you're literally, it's like something out of a torture chamber from a medieval scene in some horrible, scary movie. And then you break it down, and then you stand up, and then you break down what it's like to lift your leg and try and take that first step. And it's beyond even pain, it's fear, it's pain, it's, you know, things that you just can't even quite imagine. But the only way to do that is to not be totally overwhelmed by the macro of it, and just to do those tiny little things, and to be focused on the things you can actually do something about at that moment, right? I couldn't just stand up and walk, so I couldn't get overwhelmed by that feeling. I had to just do those tiny, small first things. Learn how to grip. My hand doesn't really work very well. You know, all the stuff I won't bore everybody with. So that is breaking something down into something where you feel like you have got control of that micro thing you have to do, I think can be quite helpful. That's the first thing. And the second thing is, you know, as important as just the situation that you're in my experience, it is as important to be able to get out of it. So I have no doubt in my mind, none at all, that I would have died if I hadn't had the support and love of my friends and family in a quite remarkable way. And beyond that, of, you know, in addition to that, I should say, you know, having poems read to me, having movies broadcast onto the ceiling of my hospital room, which my friends did, having the little babies brought in when they were born and put in my weird kind of cot bed. So, you know, if it feels shit, talk to someone that loves you about it, because there are people that love you always, and they like being deployed, it turns out. You know, I've got friends who wrote me a postcard every single day in hospital for nearly 2 years, and it makes me start to cry to think about it. And so I realize I'm very lucky, and that's a very strange experience to be comparing to what people are facing now. But picking up the phone or sending a text message to someone that you love or loves you, and, you know, touching that network is also a great way of feeling like you have actually got more strength than you might think you have.
Well, thank you for sharing that. It's a shame because a bunch of really good questions have come in, but I think we're about on time for us to wrap up. So I just wanted...
Ask me them on Twitter. I'll be there. I can answer them on Twitter.
Very good. I'm just going to hand over to Holly, but just from me, Martha, thanks again for giving us your time. It was really, really good to hear you.
Thank you very much for inviting me. Stay strong and safe and sane, everybody.
Thank you. Over to you, Holly.
And Lucky Voice does have an online application. Don't forget, if you need a sing, might cheer you up.
We'll head there now. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for asking such tough questions. They were brilliant. Thank you, Tarek. A huge, huge thank you, Martha. I know this was turned around quite quickly, and you're brilliant, and you covered so much in 45 minutes. It's insane. And yeah, head over to Twitter.
Okay, no, I'm serious. If any jobs on this question, I'm going to be on. I'll commit to being on Twitter for 10 minutes from now. So if you do want to have a chat, I'll be there.
A massive thank you. And this session is also available on YouTube. So you know, if you want to watch it again or share it, then please do. But yeah, thanks everyone. Have a great weekend. Great weekend? Yeah, nearly. Great evening.
Oh, just let's start it. I give you permission.